Hi, everybody. I'm Mr. Strackman, AP U.S. History teacher here at Park Vista Community High School. This year, we commemorate the 79th anniversary of the attacks on the U.S. military base at Pearl Harbor, in what was then the U.S. territory of Hawaii. Remember, Hawaii doesn't become a state until 1959. During this time, in an effort to carve out their own sphere of influence and accumulate natural resources, the Japanese had been on the offensive throughout Asia for the previous 7 years, attacking both Western influences as well as the local Asian population. President Roosevelt, knowing the Japanese were always at a need for resources, hoped that we could slow down the Japanese war machine by banning the sale of aviation fuel and high-grade scrap iron to Japan. That didn't really do much. Matter of fact, all this did was merely anger the Japanese military more, which slowly and surely had been wresting control of the Japanese government from civilian leadership. Throughout 1941, we've been trying to negotiate a solution. Meanwhile, we had banned all oil shipment and froze all Japanese assets. Unfortunately, nothing slowed down the Japanese. The Japanese prime minister at the time was General Hideki Tojo. He considered all this an ultimatum, and he more or less gave up on any diplomatic channels to end this impasse. So the goal of planning the Pearl Harbor attack fell to Admiral Yamamoto. Yamamoto was a pacifist. He didn't believe in going to war with the United States. He thought it would be dumb for Japan. He had been educated at Harvard. He had traveled and spent many years in the United States. He liked Americans. He told Tojo that if you punch the Americans, they're going to come back even tougher. However, Tojo had become very powerful in Japan, and Yamamoto took on the job of planning the Pearl Harbor attack. On Sunday morning, December 7th, 1941, while U.S. military personnel were either sleeping in, recovering from peacetime partying, or in church, the Japanese fleet was making final preparations. The first wave of planes took off from the aircraft carriers and headed towards Pearl Harbor. As they approached, they awaited the signal, Nikiyami Nubore 1208, which means climb Mount Nataka, December 8th. Remember, the Japanese fleet was still on Japanese time. So while it was the morning of December 7th in Hawaii, Japan's on the other side of the international date line. It was already December 8th. The first wave started at 7:48 a.m. Hawaii time. That would be 3:18 in the morning Japanese time. While only a minority of bombs and torpedoes actually hit their targets, it was devastating. There was so much confusion as men were awakened to the sounds of sirens and bombs. Speakers blared out, "Air raid Pearl Harbor! This is not a drill!" Americans were completely unprepared. Ammunition was locked up. Planes were parked in ways that couldn't be taken off quickly. Matter of fact, I believe only 8 planes got off the ground. But the U.S. soldiers responded swiftly and bravely to the attacks. The second wave of Japanese attack included 171 planes. They attacked the Pearl Harbor Air Base, destroying our planes just sitting on the runway. The entire attack, both waves, took 90 minutes. 2,008 U.S. sailors were killed, almost half of them in the explosion of the USS Arizona. Another 710 were wounded, and most of the fatalities happened to be junior enlisted personnel because they lived on the ships. The naval officers were off ships living in houses. 218 U.S. soldiers and airmen were killed. Another 364 were wounded. 109 Marines were killed and 69 wounded. 68 civilians killed, 35 wounded. Among the civilians were 9 firefighters from the Honolulu Fire Department. A total of 9 firefighters actually received a Purple Heart, which tends to be only a military honor. 18 ships were sunk, including 5 battleships. 188 airplanes were destroyed. Another 159 were damaged. 9 civilian planes that were flying in the area had 3 of them shot down. And as bad as it was, it could have been worse. Anyway, the U.S. was wounded, but we were still potent. But Americans were awoken from their slumber and were now angry. Secretary of War Henry Stimson said, "My first feeling was relief that the whole indecision of the last few years were over, and now the United States was united for victory." The Japanese also attacked Malaya on this day, and later on Hong Kong, Guam, the Philippine Islands, and Wake Island. The next morning on December 8th, the Japanese attacked Midway Island. Shortly after that, President Roosevelt went before Congress and asked for a declaration of war against Japan. It passed nearly unanimously. Honoring their commitment to the Axis powers, Italy and Germany declared war on the United States. So on December 11th, President Roosevelt went before Congress again and asked for a declaration of war against those two countries. And it pretty much passed unanimously. In the words of General Hideki Tojo, sometimes a man has to jump in with both eyes closed. Tojo wrongly believed that it would take the United States 2.5 years to recover from the Pearl Harbor attack. He was wrong. America was at full fighting strength in just a mere 7 months. As for Yamamoto, he took no pride in the Pearl Harbor attack. Matter of fact, people said that while everybody else was celebrating, he was in a deep depression. He viewed the attack as a sucker punch, and he found no glory in it. Afterwards, there's many quotes that are attributed to him, including, "I fear all we have done is awaken a sleeping giant and fill him with terrible resolve." His most prophetic statement was, "I can run wild for 6 months. After that, I have no expectation of success." This was amazingly prophetic, as exactly 6 months later, the U.S. won the Battle of Midway, which was the turning point in the Pacific War. Before the war, the U.S. had the 17th largest military in the world, smaller than the tiny nation of Romania. We exited the war as the most powerful nation on earth. And the so-called greatest generation who fought and won the war for liberty, they're quickly disappearing. We lose approximately 200 World War II veterans every day. This is an important part of our history that's slipping away. Talk to the veterans. Write down their stories and let them live on. The youngest American World War II veterans would be 93 years old now. Let that sink into you. Thank you all. Have a terrific day. And if you want to learn more stuff, and if you're on Facebook, search out Strachman's This Day in History to learn great stuff every single day.